You're listening to ThunderQuack Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to ThunderQuack Perfect 10. I am your host, Michael Cohen. Every episode, we dive deep with a special guest into a piece of pop culture they adore. What is a Perfect 10? I'm glad you asked. A Perfect 10 is a piece of pop culture media we love unconditionally. Is it objectively a 10 out of 10? Not necessarily, but to our guest, it's a masterpiece. So sit back, get comfy, and let's find some joy talking John Mayer's 2006 album Continuum with Karl LaClair. Karl, welcome to the show.
Mike, it's always great to be with you, my friend.
I mean, likewise. We don't do this nearly often enough, and I think that's mostly just our schedules. But when we do manage to carve out the time,
we live on opposite ends of the continent, so it is a bit tough.
Yeah. When we do manage to get together, it is always a good time. So this is exciting. This isn't the first album we've talked about. Our second episode was about the Transformers, the movie, the soundtrack with Tyler James Nichol. But that was like a movie soundtrack that was very much tied into a conversation about Transformers and you know, the animated movie in the 80s and all of that sort of thing. This is the first like just pure music episode. So that's it's cool to be breaking that ground with you. When there are so many geeky things we could have talked about, we tossed around a bunch of stuff, but we ended up landing on this, which is fun. That's it's a cool, I don't know, fun fact, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also looking forward to it too, because over on our Star Wars show that I do with Jason on Wampus Lair, we do almost every May. We do almost the whole month dedicated just to the music of Star Wars. So I love talking about music. While I have no formal training in it, very much an amateur in the one instrument that I play. But I've always loved talking about music, and it's with Star Wars, right? It's such narrative pieces too that I almost feel like you can talk about it in a particular way. But with something like pop music that are, full of lyrics and all sorts of stuff, like it's telling a story. I think I'm excited to talk about music from a very different angle. So, saying that up front, like, if you were tuning in, be like, oh man, this guy, wow, cool. Did he like get his degree at Berkeley? He sure didn't. But I just love music, and I'm looking forward to talking about it, Mike.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Well, before we get too deep into it, I'm gonna just give everybody the breakdown of exactly what Continuum is. So without further ado, I'm gonna jump into that. Today, we're diving into the musical mastery of soft rock icon John Mayer and his timeless album Continuum. Released in 2006, this album hit at the peak of Mayer's popularity, with music journalist Matt Collar calling it a gorgeously produced, brilliantly stripped to basics album that incorporates blues, soft funk, R&B, folk, and pop in a sound that is totally owned by Mayer. Mayer, both a gifted guitarist and a poetic lyricist, pours his heart and soul into Continuum, from the sultry grooves of Gravity to the introspective depth of Slow Dancing in a Burning Room. Each track is a brushstroke on the canvas of contemporary blues. The album isn't just a collection of songs, it's a reflection on love, introspection, and the ebb and flow of life. Whether you're a longtime Mayer fan or discovering Continuum for the first time, get ready for a perfect 10 experience that transcends the notes on the staff. John Mayer is possibly, I guess he's technically my favorite sort of like singer songwriter musician type of music. Most of you and me, like you just mentioned with Wampus Lair, we listen to a lot of soundtracks, right? We listen to a lot of Star Wars music, a lot of that sort of thing. But John Mayer is, if I'm going to something that's got lyrics, John Mayer is usually at the top of that. And I've been a John Mayer fan for a really long time. But if I recall correctly, you came to John Mayer a lot more recently, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Like during the pandemic,
Okay, so very recently. That's
very
that's that's
recently.
really interesting.
Yeah.
What brought you to John Mayer?
A former partner.
Okay.
She was a huge John Mayer fan. We both loved listening to albums, like vinyl records, right? Like it's all
Yeah.
the rage right again right now, which is really cool. But yeah, she had like a John Mayer album, and she was like, "Oh, I'm gonna throw this on sometime," and I was like, "Okay." I'm not necessarily a fan, right? Because he's obviously had some contentious history. He's an imperfect person, like everyone. But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, he's made some mistakes, right? And that's kind of all I really knew about him, other than "Your Body Is a Wonderland," which I thought was a fun little pop song. So I just never had any interest in him. And then she just threw his album on one day while we were making dinner, and I'm like, oh my god, this guy is incredible. And then after we broke up, like right as we broke up, Sob Rock came out, which was like the perfect healing piece. It was like John knew we were breaking up. So like that just endeared me to him right away. And then I finally started going back, listening through his discography and getting them on albums. And that's, I can't remember exactly the first time listening to Continuum. But it wasn't that first album she put on. It was The Search for Everything, which is a phenomenal album as well. Um, but yeah, I remember just like, oh, it hit me so well. It hit me so well. I mean, my longest running favorite artist of all time is Rob Thomas, who's the lead singer of Matchbox 20, but has also had an incredible solo career. He's always been my go-to singer-songwriter. But then as I listen through John's discography, I'm just like, oh man, I think I might have a new favorite, which was really hard to admit.
Hmm.
But he is an incredibly gifted songwriter in every sense of the word. I mean, he has a message to say. He has every single song with lyrics. He's telling you something. Like he's really not afraid to dig out what's deep, no matter how ugly it is. I love that about him. And he is arguably the greatest guitar player of our generation.
Hmm.
Obviously, statements like that are always subjective. There's no objective way to define something that's so artistic. But that said, I mean, he is talked about in the same breath as Eric Clapton, Stevie Ray Vaughan, all the greats. Like John Mayer
Yeah.
is listed among them. And I think this is the first album where he really showcases that, because his previous albums were much more like pop rock. Kind of like he was in high school essentially, right? You're getting high school pop rock. It's very catchy, but with Continuum, he really showed you obviously what he learned while he was at Berkeley, and just the gifts and talents that he had. Like I think that's really where he made a statement as, "Hey, I'm a great guitar player first and foremost."
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I anybody who's had the privilege of seeing him play live, which I have now twice. That first concert that I got to go see him, it was in 2006. And I it or actually maybe it was 2007. Maybe it was 2007. Yeah, I guess it was 2007. But I he we Crystal and I bought these tickets like literally last minute. We bought the tickets I think probably about 2 hours before the concert, because I didn't even, because we're talking about, this is sort of like early internet days, right? Like, um, so there was no real way to know unless you knew, and I happened to pick up while we were out that day. She was living in Victoria, which is a ferry ride and about 3 hours away from where we live now, which is where I was living at the time, in Vancouver. I She was going to school there, and we would go back and forth or whatever. And so she was over for the weekend, and I we'd gone to Granville Island for the afternoon. And there's a local newspaper, sort of like the hipster, cool people newspaper, called the Georgia Straight. I don't know if it's that anymore, but it definitely was that at the time, in 2006, 7, around that era. And I just picked it up, and we were just looking through it, and I think we were planning to maybe like go see a movie that night or something. And so I was flipping through the entertainment section, and it was like, oh, John Mayer's in town this weekend. He's playing tonight. And then we literally like hopped online, um, at a computer, had to be a desktop, couldn't do it on your phone. Hopped online and looked to see if there were tickets available, and there were, and they were floor seats for like $30 each. It was crazy.
That is crazy.
So we got those tickets, and I like I got to watch him play from, you know, I don't know, like 15 feet away.
Oh,
like I
that's
could
incredible.
I could see his fingers moving on the guitar, right?
Yeah.
Like it was unbelievable. This most recent time that we saw him, which was just back this last spring in 2023. Um or was it the spring or the fall? I can't remember. Whenever he was in town. It feels like forever now.
It was a full year tour because it was you did the Sob
Yeah.
Rock tour, right?
Well, no, it's the one that used it was solo.
Oh, you did the
So
unplugged one. Okay.
yeah. And that one we were at Rogers Arena, and we were in the nosebleeds, and you could barely see him,
Okay.
but and you could barely hear him over the drunk girl behind me. That yeah, that's a whole other story. But
I,
that first concert was unbelievable.
yeah.
Because it was this album, and I mean, like, he was playing everything, right? But the focus was kind of this album, and Try, the John Mayer trio album.
Oh, that's
Because he
awesome.
was touring with those guys at the time.
Yeah.
Um Along with his band, and yeah, it was phenomenal. Seeing him play live is so awesome.
He's
I
also hilarious.
Yes.
He's quite the he's quite the showman. I mean,
Yeah.
I've only seen him the one time. I went to the Sob Rock tour in the spring of 2021, I think it was.
Mhm.
Um, and we actually I went with two of my good friends. We got really great seats. We were probably 50 yards from him. Um, and yeah, I mean, I love Sob Rock, and he did a lot of this as well. And just listening to him in between songs too, I'm like, oh my god, this guy's
Yeah.
really funny. So,
Yeah, he's just a great entertainer, like, from top to bottom, right?
yeah,
He was also, like, during the pandemic, very funny on his social media, as he was sort of like in isolation trying to not go crazy. Like
remember
we
how
all
we
were.
did? They sent out like a bunch of celebrities were singing on um, John Lennon's Imagine.
Yeah, yeah,
He thought it was for Ariana Grande's song, so they cut in John Mayer doing an Ariana Grande song during the Imagine because he sent in the wrong stuff. It's
that's
so
funny.
funny.
That's hilarious.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Um,
we should talk
what?
more Continuum.
Yeah, yeah. What made you pick Continuum out of all of the albums? Like, why does this one stand out for you?
I mean, it was my Empire Strikes Back album. It was the first one. Well, that's not fair because that wasn't the first one I heard in its entirety. But it was the first one that grabbed me.
Yeah.
It just like from start to finish, the entire album was such an awesome ride. Like it was consistent. It had a great build, a great finale. Like it was a well written album,
Hmm.
and yeah, I mean, it's Slow Dancing in a Burning Room. I'd heard that song, years ago when it came out. But when I heard it again, it's just that guitar, like the riff he is playing, the way it's so steeped in like soul and blues. I mean, it just grabs you and pulls you right in. And then the rest of the album, I think, just is built around like this really, really intense core. So yeah, it's just so darn good.
Yeah, yeah, it is a really good album, but I find that um it was a bit of a departure, right? Like, because he had started in sort of those really sort of pop, ballad and sort of soft rock albums, like his two earlier albums, right? So
Right.
much of that stuff, which is how he got the fame that he did, was through that stuff. Like you mentioned, Your Body Is a Wonderland, and I you know actually, there's really not that many songs off of Room for Squares that went big, um his music was the type of music that you would see featured on an episode of Smallville or the OC or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it was that sort of, last 5 minutes of the episode has everything sort of over a musical montage.
Right.
Um, but then with this album, it felt like, um, it really felt like he had something a little bit more to say. It's funny because I haven't listened to it front to back in a long time, and then just before we recorded, I did listen to it from start to finish, and it really, like, it's got a through line. It has a couple of through lines, but one of the big ones is, I mean, like, contextually, you have to place it in 2006, right? Like, we're sort of we're in the middle of Bush's second term, right? Um, so that means that we're in the middle of dealing with wars in the Middle East that most people really didn't want to be a part of anymore. The 9/11 fervor had died down by that point, and people had started to realize, like, oh, this has been weaponized, like our communal outrage from 9/11 was weaponized and used as a means to start a war in Iraq, right? And so the album, like, it kind of gets into that without getting into it specifically, but it does get into it.
Yeah,
um
that's one of my favorite things about the album is I would
mhm,
say the album is essentially a collection of two types of songs. And one collection of that is it's a political, like he has some political statements to make.
yeah,
Waiting on the World to Change is kind of this anthem piece, and everybody our age loved that song in 2006.
yeah,
But then the song Belief is a much more critical look at what was energizing and weaponizing this war, right? Like really
yeah,
looking at kind of this fundamentalism within religion, both at home and abroad, right? And it's a really, really intelligent critique of that sort of stuff. But then I feel like a lot, but then the emotional pieces, which is the majority of the album,
yeah,
it's really a lot, to me, like the self-reflection going on is this is John Mayer contending with, oh my gosh, I'm famous now, right? Like he's, he's in his like late 20s, like he's a young person who's now really, really famous, right? And we've heard this story, for generations across all sorts of artists, so it's not saying that it's new, but it's his take on that though. Like a lot of the songs are like he's been in the media now, he's kind of contending with, oh man, there's things about me that I'm not proud of, but now people are going to see them. Like it's a really honest album, and I appreciate that, like that kind of um, tension and struggle he's talking about in so many of the tracks.
mhm. Yeah, for sure. It's also sort of the first time that blues and soul aspect of it really starts to take center stage in his
Mhm.
music. Before that, it was very, very pop centered.
Yes.
And then he sort of started to take a little bit more of this blues and soul, maybe a little bit of R&B. I feel like he's always had a lot of funk in there because of the focus on guitar, right? That's just
Yeah.
sort of his guitar style is very, it's very pop funk
Well, I will. Yeah.
inspired. But
And I want to just dive in quick with
yeah,
like I really agree with these first couple albums, Room for Squares and Heavier Things. They're very much pop albums for the most part. Now
mhm,
that said, I don't know them as well as the rest of his discography after Continuum, so I'm not as much an expert on those. But I will say, in light of all that popdom he's writing, he still gives us the song Neon, which is
yeah,
arguably one of the coolest guitar riffs written in like the last 50 years. So beyond that song, like he's not really stepping into that guitar superstar until Continuum, in my opinion. Um,
yeah, yeah. It's funny. It's one of those things that, and again, when you see him play live, it's like he'll add solos where there are not solos.
right.
So he gets into a little bit more of it. But yeah, it is I think really try when he kind of starts to show off a little bit. And when people started to recognize, like, oh, he's not just a pop star, right? Like he's not
Right.
just a teen beat heartthrob. But he
Yeah.
actually does have these chops. There's a little bit of it, I think, on Continuum as well that comes through. But Try is when like he, I mean, being that it's a trio, right? So everybody
Yeah.
gets to kind of get their moments on it. But yeah,
Yeah, that is definitely one of my John Mayer blind spots. I've heard bits of the John Mayer trio, but I've never actually sat down and listened to them as
yeah.
albums. I really need to get on that.
Yeah, I mean it's the thing with those albums is that they are a departure, and that's why
Of
it's
course.
it's not just him, right? And then there's also it's a lot more covers. It's a lot more sort of him pulling in some standards and that sort of thing, in order to sort of live that jazz trio
Yeah.
sort of vibe. Although I mean, there's a cover on this one as well, because he does a cover of Jimi Hendrix "Bold as Love," right? On
Oh,
Continuum, which
yeah.
is
That's
yeah,
funny. I forgot that that's a cover, and it's actually the only song on the album I don't particularly care. Like, I don't dislike it, but it's the only one where
yeah.
I'm like, that's the one song that I don't care about.
It's funny because I feel pretty similarly, where it's like I kind of take it or leave it.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for that is that it is such a departure from uh from his style of lyric, right? Like it's you get into it and it's like in 2006 these lyrics are a little bit, I don't want to say hacky because I don't want to sound like I'm coming down on Jimi Hendrix, but um in the 70s, like 60s 70s, I don't know when Bold as Love was originally released, but because I don't know
Hmm.
Jimi Hendrix that well, but like you're like it's the lyrics are much more of that time, so it does feel disjointed from the rest of the album because it is sort of this more dated, like it's the thing of like the colors being emotions and stuff like that, which all feels very sort of um like elementary to me, you know what I mean? Like it's just it's not quite as complex as his lyrics usually are, which to me, like for me, that's where and people give me flack for being a John Mayer fan, and I'll be like, whatever, man. Like it's like I don't care. Like you can paint me as whatever. It's the most. It's funny. We're two white guys on a podcast talking about John Mayer.
Right.
It's pretty white. Hard H white. But I but one of the reasons why I do like John Mayer so much is because I do really, really like get into his lyrics and what these like the various sort of themes and that sort of thing
Mhm.
that are sort of interwoven throughout his stuff. So that's one of those ones when he does covers, it does tend to, I don't know, I kind of tend to roll off of them a little bit more because it's not it's not him, right? He's
Right.
just kind of
Yeah.
performing something that he likes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, "Free Fallin'" is a popular one that he covers in a
Yeah,
lot of shows, and
yeah,
like it's on that great live album that actually came out shortly after Continuum. It's a great album. Gotta recommend
yeah,
that one. But that said, "Free Fallin'" is, and when I saw him live, a couple years back, he did that as well, and it's like that's a song again when it's on the album, it's like I can skip it, like, but
yeah,
it was really fun live, right? Like it's a very popular older song that everybody knows the words to. It's easy to sing along to. Like it's a perfect live cover.
yeah,
Um,
totally,
so
totally, yeah. It's definitely part of like, so a lot of that stuff, a lot of the covers and stuff like that, I feel like are better experienced live and as sort of part of the communal experience. I don't know. I have a funny sort of relationship with live performance because especially like I haven't been to that many concerts, but the ones that I have been to, two of them being John Mayer ones, it's like I really want to go and listen to the music.
mm,
And especially with that the last one that I went to when I went and saw him do solo, right? For those that don't know, the purpose of that tour was that, like Carl mentioned, is sort of like an unplugged performance, but it's just him, um no backup, no band, or anything like that. So he was just coming out and doing. He would either be on the piano or the guitar, and and doing his thing. Um, and it was fantastic. It was amazing. Unfortunately, like I mentioned before, there was a drunk woman behind me just like screaming the songs.
Mm.
And she was directly behind me, like I mean like directly behind me, and she was like leaning forward in her seat, scream singing the songs completely out of tune, and it was like, I cannot hear the music. um and
Sure.
and at a certain point I had to turn around and be like, hey, can you just like I know you're having a good time and we're all here for the same reason, but can you just like bring it down a little? And she just like, as a drunk person is wont to do, just got like belligerent with me, and
Mm.
just got worse and worse and worse until like me and like three other people around her were all like, knock it off. And then she got in a fight with her boyfriend, and they got up and left for a while, and then they came back, and they and she sang one more song, and then I and I was like, come on, man. Like it was it, oh, what song was it? I think it was during, you know what, it's funny, it's off this album, because it was Stop This Train, which is like such a meaningful song.
Hmm.
And he was playing it on the piano, and it was just like this beautiful performance of it. And then that was when she came back, like in the middle of that song, and like I was fine. It was like, oh my god, thank goodness she's gone now, because like he's getting into the more like mellow stuff, and like sort of the second half of the concert. And then she came back, she sat back down, and then he started playing something off of Born and Raised, which is my favorite album, and he hadn't played anything off of that album at that point. And I turned to her, I was like, hey, this is like one of my favorite songs, can you just not for this one? And she lost it. She lost it, and they ended up leaving. And then I found out later from her friend that stayed, that they like, her and her boyfriend like broke up because of this, because like everybody around us was like mad at her, right? Like it wasn't just me. I was just I was that guy that was vocal about it. But yeah, like everybody was kind of like, it was one of those moments, like it didn't literally happen, but you could kind of feel it, of like when they got up and left the first time, it was people almost like clapped of like, yeah, you're leaving. But yeah, it was such an ordeal. So it's like that sort of thing always like kind of ruins my experience at a live performance. I
Yeah, that's valid, right? Like, and that's the thing is like, I mean, you and I, Mike, we're in the same similar, for the most part, like socioeconomic standings, and
Yeah,
I don't have a ton of money where I can go to concerts a lot throughout the year.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
bigger name folks, right? Like it's obviously always easy if you want to go to local shows. But, bigger names, like I'm gonna maybe go to one or two a year, and that's also just my own tolerance with crowds, because like as I've gotten older, I get really really anxious in big
yeah,
crowds. So if I'm
yeah,
going to do this, right, like it's like, all right, I'm going to spend my money and I'm going to spend my time. And to John's credit, like I mentioned earlier, I love Rob Thomas. Rob Thomas always does this as well. Is like these artists are like really really appreciative of the fact that you're giving those things to them, right? Like you took this time, you took this money to invest in me. I really want to give you a great experience. And
yeah,
that's what they always are trying to give to you. But it sucks when you're like around somebody who just is so selfishly not self-aware that they ruin your experience, right? Because
yeah,
music live, when it hits, I'm lucky. I've never actually had that sort of experience at a big concert. Um, and as a result, like I get to enter into kind of that sacred moment of what live
yeah,
concerts are about, right? It's about bringing these people together who find connection to these words, to the message that he has to say, and want to like feel the sound of his music like wash over you together. And
yeah, yeah.
when that's what it can be, it's oh boys,
It's
that
so funny because what the silver lining in that experience is that so we're Crystal and I, it's like just the two of us went, because the girls don't care about John Mayer, so it's
fair.
just the two of us, date night or whatever, right? And there was a family sitting next to us in our row, like to the aisle. So there were four of them. It was a dad, mom, and two older kids, like older teenagers, probably around like 14 to 17, sort of. And so like it's like their family outing thing, and it turned out that like they had driven all of the way from Alberta, from I think Calgary, which is like a day and a half drive through the mountains. Not an easy drive, but um John had not come to Vancouver in like since that previous, like the reason why I've only been to two John Mayer concerts is because since I've been a John Mayer fan, he has only been to Vancouver twice,
Mm.
that I know of. Like maybe he had come before that, like with the previous albums, but like this was the first time that he'd been back in like forever, right? It's like 15 years or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but like forever. And this the dad of this other family was like us, like a huge fan. So he had like dragged his family out to Vancouver from Calgary. They drove all the way out and they did some other stuff and they enjoyed the city or whatever, but the main reason that they were in town was for this concert. And so like when I told this girl to be quiet, he was like, thank you. It was like, it's like, because it was really taking away from the experience for him as well, and it was this thing of
Yeah,
like it was this such a big deal.
Mike.
um
Not all heroes wear capes, Mike. Okay,
yeah, yeah.
you know,
um
some of them are just willing to speak up.
but I but yeah, I mean like one of the funniest parts of the whole thing is that like, so after they left the second time and we talked to her, it was like the girl and her boyfriend left and they were with this other woman, and I had ended up, because I felt bad, right? Like I like this was not my goal. I just wanted her to be quiet. I didn't want them to like have a bad time, right? I was just like, can you please just stop screaming in my ear? Um and so I turned around to apologize to her friend of like, hey, I'm sorry if this is like wrecked your night. Like that's not my goal. And she was like, I totally understand. They do this all the time, like because they had ended up like started fighting and bickering and stuff in the like behind us. She's like, they do this all the time. And I'm like, I just can't understand why somebody would pay money to come to pay so much money to come to a concert, as you're saying, like for us, it's like you get to go to something like that once in a while, right? Um, and she was like, well, like I paid for it. And I was like, oh, I feel even worse now because she had paid for all three of them.
Oh man.
And then her friends basically were like getting themselves kicked out. Right.
Oh, that sucks.
And had like ruined it for her. So I felt so bad for her of like she dropped a lot of money because I think it, even for like those nosebleed seats, I think it was somewhere around, you know how it is with like the Ticketmaster fees
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
like, oh, it's a venue fee and like it's like, oh my god, like at the end of the day it's like a $40 ticket costs you like $80,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
um so it, like she had shelled that out three times over, and like to bring her friends with her. And I was just like, oh man, that sucks, that really sucks.
yeah. That
but
does.
but I don't know,
You know, you
choose choose better friends to go to concerts with.
yeah,
But
or
yeah,
yeah, or figure out how to go alone.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. You saying that he's only been to Vancouver twice now and not a long
yeah,
time. I mean, I'm in Boston, which is great because he loves Berkeley and he occasionally
yeah.
comes back and even teaches a class at Berkeley. So he's in Boston pretty regularly, which is
Oh,
pretty
nice.
awesome. And he's very popular here. I mean, he's from New
Yeah,
England. He's from Connecticut. Like,
yeah,
you know, people of New England love, like, not all of them, but like he's pretty popular from coming from here. And just like Chris Evans, like Chris Evans is really liked out here because he's
yeah.
from just outside Boston. Um, but yeah, yeah.
We kind of get the short shrift in Vancouver because we're so close to Seattle. So
Uh, yeah,
a lot of artists will come to Seattle, but then it's like, well, it's not worth the hassle of crossing the border just to go to Vancouver, because also like the other thing about Vancouver is that like our venues only have so much capacity anyways. So like, here's an example: Taylor Swift, she is finally got like they finally announced that she's coming here, but like she did her whole North American Eras tour without coming to Vancouver, and then is doing the international tour. And then after all of that, next year, she'll be here. Or maybe it's no, I guess it is next year now. It's 2024 now. So like the end of this year, like in like December of this year, she'll be here after she's like basically been everywhere else in the world. It's like, yeah, I guess I'll go to Vancouver. And the reason why is because like she sold out every night that she's here, right? Like it's like the tickets went in 15 minutes, but the venue is so small that like even if she plays like the place with the largest capacity, it's nothing compared to the stadiums that you guys have down there. Because we don't have, like, we've got the Canucks, and then like we don't have an NFL team, right? So we don't have like an NFL
Yeah,
stadium to sell out.
that's a good point.
So a lot of them kind of just skip over us, and but they will go to Calgary or Edmonton, and they'll go to Toronto because Toronto has bigger venues. But yeah, it's one of those things. So it's always been one of those things of like, do we go down to Seattle, like, but I it's just never worked out timing wise before. But then to have him come, it was like, okay, finally, good. And then yeah, it was the worst concert experience that I've ever had. But it's funny because I balanced that with the other time that we saw him, which was the best concert experience that I've ever had. So um yeah, it's, but I am not a live music person. There's sort of like a debate with music aficionados of what, I'm not one, but they'll be like, well, what's the more true experience of an album? Is it the live version, like seeing it live in concert, or is it listening to the studio one, right? Because even though the studio one is like produced and it's all of the best takes and it's all of the best this and that, right? um it's like you put it in your ears and you listen to it, right? Like you get to actually hear everything. Whereas anytime you're in a live venue, unless you are lucky enough to get to see somebody play in like a really small venue, like in for some random reason, right? Like you're really not experiencing the music as much as you're experiencing the performance. So it's I don't know, six of one, half dozen of the other, I think, but I prefer listening to albums.
Yeah, I
That's sort
typically
of
do
my thing.
too. Like, I'm still. I mean, I'm a big San Francisco 49er fan. I love that
Mm.
aspect of the NFL. Never been to a game, and I never really care to, because it's like I like watching it from the comfort of my home. I get great,
Mhm.
like I get to see the replays really easily. I get to see a great view of the field. I'm not surrounded by 50,000 people. So much better, and that's what
Yeah.
typical take on a concert too. But that said, really, like I just remember the old debate, like when I first started playing guitar, back in high school, which is not long before this album came out. There was, like teenagers do, they were like, oh, a real musician does everything just live, and the like,
Yeah.
they should be able to do it exactly the same just live. And it's like, well, recording is a work of art as well. Producing an album is a work of art. Editing
Yeah.
an album is a work of art. Like that's all artistry too. And you just have more tools to play with. So of course it's going to sound different. Now, if you have a preference from one over the other, that's totally valid. But like, to try to pretend like those other aspects aren't part of the art making is kind of foolish to me. Um,
Totally.
and I think that's something that John did very well with Continuum. He produced this album very well. And I
Mhm.
should have done my homework to look and see if he'd produced his previous albums, but I know from this one forward, he produces every album. Like he's
Yeah.
very much a student of what he learned. I mean, I love Berkeley. Like I didn't go there, but like it's here in Boston. I've got a couple of friends that have gone there. They're such chill people. Like they're awesome. And like the vibe that John Mayer clearly learned from there, like he takes that into the studio as well. So I really like that. Like, I think with Continuum, what John Mayer is also showing is this beautiful combination of head and heart. Like he has this intelligence to understand how to put music together. Like as simple as like how to notate a song, to also like how to mix it and edit it in the studio. Like he's very, very smart about what he's doing. And you put on top of that just this natural God-given talent for making music with guitar. Like, I mean, he's a musician with the capital M, like, in every sense of the word. And it's just this album is a beautiful combination of that, which is why I think it's just so freaking iconic.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, what track is your favorite track off of the album, off of this one?
Uh, it's such a hard question because I love every track on this album except Bold as Love for different reasons. Sorry, not
Yeah.
to crap on Bold as Love. That again, just if it wasn't on there, it'd be fine. But I gotta say, Belief is my favorite.
Is it?
Primarily for I just love that guitar riff. I love the percussion on it. Um, I mean, it's just this really cool, like little soulful beat, and then the way he just plays this guitar scale up the fretboard, and then right back down. I mean, it's something so simple and yet so freaking cool.
Yeah.
It's just this great combination of musical gift. And so I love it for like every time that song comes on, I move my body to it. Like I love music that moves my body. Like that's good music. That's one of the primary purposes of music. Like Belief makes my body move because it has such a cool groove to it. And I
Yeah.
love that, I love that guitar riff. Like it's very, very, very bluesy. And then I love the song even more because it's a it's a reaction to this made up war in Iraq, right? That by 2006, like you were saying earlier, Mike, right? Like we as a society like had gotten over the shock of nine
Mhm.
11, and we had been duped into this response of revenge and bloodshed. Like it was bullshit. um and that's
Yeah.
what this song is calling out. And what it's really indicting is and this is something Bush did, and he's, and at least in my lifetime, the first to really do this, and now it's really gotten out of hand. But he really weaponized religion,
Yeah.
particularly evangelical Christianity, and it became this force of righteous anger, which has never ever been a tenet of Christianity ever. um, but this movement like really warped it, and on the other side of the world, right, you have this beautiful religion in Islam that these select few fundamentalists just pervert so horribly that it creates violence. And this song is a
Yeah.
reflection on when you're fighting and just dying for what you believe in, you've already lost. Like you're doing it wrong. Mike, for a quick crossover to Star Wars, like this would be a song about the Jedi entering the Clone Wars, right? Like,
Yeah.
whoa,
Yeah.
you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
You know, it's such a great indictment of that. And I love the live version of it on the live album because the way he sings the end of it is he just has a lot more of a rasp to it. But kind of these closing lines about, it belief is what puts children in the sand, folded flags in a mother's hand, right? Like it's this
Yeah.
reflection of like we at home in America, we're seeing more and more young men and women coming back from this bullshit war, and it was all for false belief.
Yeah.
So I really love that notion. And as a college chaplain, like I think about this song all the time in doing some of my work. And when people start getting so caught up in the fundamentals of things that they forget about the compassion at the heart, like it's a problem. And I think this song is a beautiful indictment of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I found it really interesting listening to it today in light of what's going on in the world right now, right?
Yeah.
And to be intentionally not vague about it, I'm talking about what's happening in Palestine, and the war. People refer to it as a war. It's not really a war. Wars usually have multiple sides to them, at least two, as opposed to what's happening in Palestine right now, which is just systematic ethnic cleansing and genocide, and then a response to that. So and this song, that idea of belief, exactly what you're talking about, that the way that at this point in time Islamophobia was at such a fever pitch,
Mhm.
right? That if you said Islam or Muslim, people just went, oh, terrorist. Like it was just
Yeah.
that it meant the same thing, which is just such a perversion of language, flat out. Like because equating terrorist acts with any belief structure, especially the the largest one on the planet. I think is just such an ignorant way to weaponize people, right? Like you said, using evangelical Christianity as this way to motivate people to engage in and engage with some pretty terrible stuff that was going on, right? Like like wars that should not have been waged in regions that we really have no business waging wars in. And very similar stuff is happening today with what's happening in Palestine with Israel. And it just like the thing about it that sucks the most, it's the same thing happening there now that was happening here, and Canada was a little bit less so, but we were very involved as well. We definitely felt the effects of it, of the American politics of weaponizing belief and getting people so riled up. They fail to see what's actually happening, and can dehumanize who has been deemed an enemy, and all of that stuff. And it's like, it's just in Waiting on the World to Change, he's got the lyrics about like, it's one day this generation is going to rule the population, but till then we'll keep on waiting. And it's like, this was 2006, it's 2024. it's it's been a while, guys. That generation that he's talking about is now the generation in charge, and like nothing changes. Like
Right.
it was a little bit disheartening for me to listen to those lyrics again, because like what I'm seeing online, and now granted it is also very different now, because what I'm seeing online is a lot of people who are very awake to the fact that the media is trying to manipulate what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now, and trying to motivate us to align with government ideology. Government ideology is motivated by money and power. That's like, it has nothing to do with humanity. It has nothing to do with compassion, which is the stuff that these songs are about, right? These political songs are about. So, and it's the same thing that was happening in 2006 with the war in Iraq, right? That was about resources in the Middle East. That was about controlling commerce, and making sure that they didn't have enough power to control American commerce, right? Like that's what that was all about. And 9/11 was an opportunity that was used to get in there, just like the Hamas attacks have been a really great excuse for Israel to just like ramp up their that entire conflict to a scale that we haven't seen. I don't think that we've ever seen in our lifetime. Um, and so yeah, like I don't know. It's difficult. We get into the political stuff. It's difficult not to get on a soapbox with this, but um, it just really, like, while I was listening, it brought that into stark relief of like, it's the same thing. It's just the same thing. Like, it just keeps repeating itself. So I don't know. Hopefully this time around the public is a little bit more aware and not quite as caught up in it. But I am also seeing a lot of Islamophobia. I'm seeing the thing that people really love right now, which is slightly different, is the, like, if you say anything critical, you are an anti-Semite, right? Um, which I'll just say here on this platform to all 100 of you that will listen to this episode, I Israel and Judaism are not the same thing. So having a stance against the government of Israel is not a stance against the people of Israel, because they're not the ones making those decisions. It's a government, and then the military is not the same thing as the people or the religion. Like, these are separate things. So I but that, bringing it back into that song, into belief, like, that's the whole point, is that, like, they're trying to make us believe that um this is religiously fueled, right? That this is Islam versus Judaism, and it's not. It's these are governments fighting, right? And not even really governments fighting, because Palestine has not really been afforded the ability to have a proper government. So you've just got this one government entity that's just like enacting these things on these people, and it's it couldn't be the furthest thing from anything involving belief. But that's the narrative that they want to push, is that it's about there. It's the whole, the point I'm making is that like they're trying to do the same thing to us now in 2024 that they were doing in the early 2000s, of like, if you're not with us, you're against us, right?
Hmm.
um and it I don't know, I hope that it's not working. I hope that I'm not in an echo chamber. I do hope that like that the majority of people out there are aware of these facts, and they're seeing things from the ground, like from actual Palestinians, and taking that at face value. But it's tough, man. It's tough. This song just like it just brought all of that into such stark relief. So it makes sense to me that it's your favorite. Like it's a really really powerful and a really really well written song, to be able to like remind me of all that stuff that I've kind of left in the past, right? We've all kind of moved on from 2006, I think, but to have it all sort of brought back, and then go like, oh man, we're right there again, aren't we? We're just repeating the same mistakes of the past. It's yeah.
Well, I want to say, I think it kind of balancing out uh, the indictment that is contained in a song like that,
Mm-hmm.
in belief, and I would argue, it's funny, Mike, you said that when you were listening to Wait on the World to Change, you're like, oh man, because you're right, like we are that generation now, and it's still the same. So it's
Yeah.
a little disheartening to hear now, but I think its purpose is still just as valid. The purpose in
Mm-hmm.
2006 was is saying like, I still believe that we can get better. Like that's really what's at the heart of
Yeah.
the song. And yes, he's a younger person, probably with a little more naivete, but not everybody has to be jaded Luke Skywalker from Last Jedi. Some people are allowed to still be hopeful. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to like whatever. I'm not here to talk Star Wars, but like that's just an honest opinion about that. And I think a really beautiful, and it's right in the middle of the album, is the song "The Heart of Life." It's really right at the halfway point of the album.
Yeah.
This really fun song, "The Heart of Life," and so yeah, here's kind of his message in it, and it's so good.
Pain throws your heart to the ground. Love turns the whole thing around. No, it won't all go the way it should, but I know the heart of life is good.
It's kind of like it's his sentiment. It's that same spirit of waiting on the world to change. Like he still believes that the heart of life is good. I love that. Like it's a hopeful message in the midst of a
Mm-hmm.
lot of crappy situations. And I think the lyrics are also very personal. I mean, I think there's a lot of songs on this that are they're heartbreak songs. I mean, so many songs are written about heartbreak. As someone who experiences far more of it than I would like, I get it. It's probably why I always go to these songs. But he's making it personal, but it's also grander if you want it to be. Right? Like, um, things in life often don't go the way that we hope, but at the end of the day, heart of life is good. Like it's still good.
Yeah.
And right, like, right, contending with the fact, like as you said earlier, Mike, like you and I are two well-off white men, just like John Mayer. He's better off than we are financially, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But
Just a touch.
but
Yeah.
like yes, it's always easier for folks like us to see that brighter side. But I think the most content people though in the world like still hold this belief that at the core of life though there are more of us that are good than bad. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually a closing sentiment of one of my favorite characters in the Expanse sci-fi series. So
It's I mean, I say I've actually said this quite a bit lately on Forced Perspectives when we're talking about Star Wars, um, and sort of the because it seems like every other week we've got a controversy going on over in that fandom. Some person trying to manipulate, and get people all riled up about something. And I say all the time, it's like, I truly believe that 99% of people on this planet are good people, like truly good people. Like, I think that evil is very, very rare and very, like, few and far between. And it, unfortunately, it those people who are truly evil, who do have that like 1%, they also have managed to accumulate a great deal of wealth. Not to say that all of the 1% is evil with a capital E, but that, like, the majority of them are, right. Like, the overlap there is almost a circle, the Venn diagram is almost a circle. But like that, the problem there is that it's like that it's a disproportionate amount of influence, right? Evil has this disproportionate amount of influence over the world than good, but only because our minds are sort of tuned to see it that way. And so, like, a song like that, it really does a good job of, like, I think, recalibrating, helping us recalibrate and look around. Because I say this all the time, like, if people were really as bad as a lot of folks want to believe, then, like, we wouldn't be able to get in our cars and drive around in a city.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we're all like, so many of us getting in cars and we're behind the wheels of these things that we could very easily use to just kill, right? But people don't do that, and it doesn't even occur to us, right? We're just getting from A to B, and that's what most people are doing. Most people are just living their lives. um but that negativity, I don't know, it's, I think, just as human beings, I think, just out of self-preservation, we have that tendency to sort of bend back towards that negativity a lot of the time, and blow it out of proportion. You and I were talking about, life as a podcaster before we started recording, and it's so easy to get into a headspace where it's like, you could have 10 people tell you that your podcast is great, and then one person comes in and says that they hate it, and you'll just stew on that for days, right? Like, it cuts so much deeper than the positive stuff. So, yeah, there does tend to be a song on every album, I find, with John Mayer, where he's like, he kind of pops in there and goes like, hey, by the way, things are pretty okay. Like, but again, that is definitely the perspective of privileged white man of means, which is probably, I mean, like you said, like, that's where we can kind of relate into it. Not everybody's going to. I think that's where John Mayer gets a lot of flack, is that, like, he is writing songs for, you know high middle income white guys, and the girls who love them. I And so, yeah, there's a little bit of there's some rightful flack that I think that he gets for being that guy. But at the same time, I don't know, we deserve music about us too, I think. uh
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we live in life too, right? And having
yeah, yeah,
somebody who's thought a little bit more deeply about it and can make it rhyme and sing along, like, yeah, I like taking sometimes the mundanity of life, of our everyday experience, and hearing it in a more operatic fashion. you know,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
I'm
for
I'm
sure.
here for it. Um,
Yeah,
and
I really love Stop This Train. Like, that's
mm,
that's probably my favorite track off of this album, and that is one of those ones that, like, and I think the reason why I like it so much is how much I relate to it. um yeah, there you go.
yeah, I didn't know if you wanted me to play some for a second.
Yeah,
It's very folk. That guitar is very folk.
yeah, it's and that is the stuff that I like more, right? Like Born and Raised is my favorite
Sure.
album of his, which gets into sort of more of that sort of folk and southern rock sort of vibe that he was on for a minute there, um
Real
with
quick,
that. And yeah,
I'm just gonna interject. Like, I've always enjoyed this song, but I've come to love this song because the two friends that I went to his concert with, who also
yeah,
big fans of him, they listen to this album sometimes at home, and their 3-year-old daughter loves singing along to this. So my buddy sent me a video of him singing it with her, and I fell in love with the song in a whole new way. when he did that a few weeks back, and I was like, "Yep, this is now one of my favorite John Mayer songs," just because I loved listening to them sing it together.
Yeah, it's I think it hits for me because it's just it's a song about how um like life just keeps going no matter what you're doing, like, so good or bad, with like the ups and downs, it time keeps going forward, right? And so there's a point in the song where he's kind of talking about getting older, um and then he goes to his dad for some advice, and his dad comes back to him and says, this is all in the lyrics in the song, right? He's like, I turn 68, you'll renegotiate. Like, that just sticks with me so much because it's just like you always, every everybody thinks of wherever they're at. It's funny. I'll be 39 this year. Crystal just turned 39. And so it's the last year of our 30s. She keeps saying it's the last year of my 30s. And we have this tendency to want to like put this punctuation on our lives, right? Whether it's commas or periods or exclamation points, but we want to like punctuate it and like break it into these eras. But it's so funny because you talk to people and it's like I'll see people in their 20s posting on social media, like on TikTok or whatever. It's like, oh, I'm 29. Oh, everything's over. I'm almost 30. And it's like, my 30s have been the best part of my life. And going into my 40s, I anticipate that my 40s will probably be even better, right? Like just as because my 30s have been very dominated by raising small children, and when I hit my 40s, I they'll be starting to get older and a little bit easier to manage, in some ways more difficult than others. But um I
Also,
imagine that when I hit my 50s and my 60s, it'll like it'll just keep recalibrating, right? Like, it'll just like you'll renegotiate. You'll go like,
right.
no, actually, I have a lot of life left to live. I have a lot of stuff in front of me. um Even as you hit midlife, which is where I'm at, and it's like, is there more before you, or like ahead of you or behind you, right? Like, you're sort of doing that mental math on a daily basis. But so the song's about that. And when I was younger, I certainly did not care. In 2006, I wasn't listening to this song going like, yeah, man, it's real tough. But now in 2024, I'm like, I was saying to Crystal, actually, not that long ago, we were listening to it came on in a playlist, and I was like, I have a tough time listening to this song now because of that specific lyric,
Hmm.
because he's talking to his dad, and my dad died 2 years ago, and he was 67, 66, 67. Can't do that math. I guess 66, because he's
Not old.
yeah. So he was like right at that age, and so he didn't hit 68, right? He didn't get there. So I listen to that lyric, I hear that, and it's like he was just shy of that. So it always kind of like puts that into perspective for me of like of what that can mean, right?
Yeah.
Which is just sort of like a message of like, just do what you can right now. Like don't stop worrying about what you've done in the past and your mistakes, and stop being stressed out about the future and what's ahead of you, because it's not real, right? Like, it's not the future hasn't happened yet. So it's like, it's very much a reminder to be present, to live in the now, which I always appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great track. Mike, I want to just talk quickly before we wrap up,
Yeah.
about another song that's obviously super popular off this album, which I just be remiss not to mention with this guitar riff. Slow Dancing in a Burning Room, while it's not my favorite on the album, like I said, it was the first one that really was like, oh my God, this is a friggin' unbelievable song. So, Mike, I've been playing guitar since I was a sophomore in high school back in 2002. Um,
Yeah.
I was a better guitar player in high school than I am today because I was playing a lot more religiously. I was also really into 80s rock. So I was learning a lot of like 80s rock cover. And it's just, it's complicated, fast little music to play. But as I've gotten older, I just don't have the same amount of time for it. But I still love pulling my acoustic off the wall and just playing a cover. But since hearing this particular song, like I've actually renegotiated my relationship with guitar. I think John would be very proud of that. Like, I think he loves that instrument so much. You can tell on a song like this. And at the end of last year, my goal was to be able to just play that riff. And I'm not good at lead guitar, like I said, anymore. And I even watched a video of John Mayer talking about, like, again, he teaches guitar sometimes over at Berkeley. And one of the things he said is like when you're learning a cover, if it's a type of music you don't normally play, rather than just learning how to play the notes, go learn and try to play that style of guitar. So for a song like Slow Dancing in a Burning Room, that would mean, Karl, go learn how to play some blues scales. Man, that's a lot of work and I'm too lazy. So I'll own that. But I love that that's really where John even like indicates, like, don't just mimic the notes, like learn how to play that way. And I think this song is a perfect blues song because the entire message is about being aware that you are in a relationship that's crashing and burning, right? And you like, you don't want it to, but you know that it is. Mike, I think this is a great piece of music to put over the throne, the Praetorian fight in Last Jedi, right? Like that's Ray and Ray thinks Ben is back, but then it's like, oh no, we are in fact slow dancing in a burning room. So I love that song. Again, like musically it's brilliant and beautiful, and like you feel it in your soul with those notes, and the way he harmonizes his guitar during the solo, it's incredible. And then there's also just this really bitter like ending of a story going on here. It's showing that self-awareness of recognizing when things just aren't working. That doesn't even have to be a romantic relationship, right? Like even friendships sometimes. I hate when this happens, but like when you just notice that a friendship is dying, you're slow dancing in a burning room, right? It sucks. Like it's coming to an end, and this is the tension of that. And he even gives us that with the musical notes. So yeah, brilliant song. I just had to say that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's also such a great example of I think what actually I don't even think this is like academic. This is what stands out about John Mayer and his guitar playing specifically. There are a lot of people who can play the guitar, who can hit the notes, and they can hit a lot of notes very quickly, which is considered playing a guitar well, right? But what John Mayer does with a guitar is like he makes it sing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not like, I'm not being poetic when I say that. Like he literally he will get the guitar to sing backup while he's singing, right? Like you listen to a lot of his songs, and like you were saying, like the way that he'll harmonize stuff with the guitar. There aren't a lot of guitar players who do that. Like it is actually like a very rare thing. Most lead guitar is melody and rhythm, right? Like it's sort of like it's just kind of giving you some background of the song, and then the vocals are what really carry melody and really carry the song. But like the parts of John Mayer songs that you find yourself humming the most tend to be like his solos, his like when he gets the guitar to do that, when he like bends it, right? Like he really just like takes one note and just like a piece of Laffy Taffy, just stretches it out as far as possible and with as much sort of texture and nuance to it as you can get out of a single note. And that, like, again, seeing him do that live is ridiculous. It also, the faces that he makes when he does it, I mean, he's got some of the most hardcore guitar face, which those who know what guitar face is know what I'm talking about. But next time you see a really really intense guitar player play guitar, watch them when they get into it, especially in the solo, and watch the faces that they make, because they will contort in ways that are unnatural. I but but I like, my thing is that like the grosser the guitar face, like the more ugly and nasty the guitar face, the better the guitar player, as far as I'm concerned. Like that's really one of those things that distinguishes people who are really, really like getting that instrument to perform
Yeah.
at the top of its level, because it's no longer about the human being, it's about just service to this instrument. I guitar is my favorite instrument as well. I have no musical aptitude whatsoever, other than just, you know, an ear for it, listening to it. um but I can't, I don't know how to read music, I can't play an instrument to save my life, but I but I love the guitar so much. Just as an instrument, like if I have to pick something, pull something out, it's like that. A good guitar player is worth so much more to me than anything else.
Mm.
um and I mean, like, I don't think that that's an unpopular or you know, weird thing to say. I think a lot of people like guitar if they really, if you ask them to think about it. But yeah, that is like, that's what really brings me to John Mayer's stuff over other singer songwriters, is just like when he gets going. And this album has a few really great spots. Slow Dancing in a Burning Room is probably the standout for that. But man, like his later stuff, like some of his more recent stuff, Sob Rock is a really great example. Sob Rock has some incredible guitar work on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that was really, that's why he dipped into that genre, into sort of like that 80s sort of power ballad genre, was so that he could just go ham on the guitar with some of those faster moving, like sort of more complex riffs and that sort of thing, which is different from this era when he was much more about those really extended, just sort of getting that guitar to just kind of, I don't know, sing is the only word that I can use for it, because he just does. That's what it does. It just holds a note and just goes all over the place with it. It's so good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Awesome. Uh well, I think that brings us to the end. I just, before we get out, I just want to ask you the question of exactly what it is for you. If you can sum up what makes Continuum a perfect 10 album for you.
I think it's the establishment of somebody as an artist. This is, to
Mm,
me, John's standout album. And I go back and forth all the time on whether it's my favorite, but I think there is something particularly unique, which is this is where he found his voice and he was ready to start using it. You know, I'll make a quick Star Wars analogy again. This is I am a Jedi like my father before me. It's this sense of coming into yourself. And while John
mm,
has done really awesome things off of this, like you said, I love that you said Stop This Train is one of your favorite pieces, not only because of its message, but also it's musically the most similar to Born and Raised, which is very true. Like that's kind of his
yeah.
his country album, like authentic country, not this pop stuff that they call country today. It's fine, like it's pop music, but it's not really country anyway. But like, so that makes sense. And there are different tracks on this album that then become more fleshed out in future albums. But this is kind of this John Mayer really opening up of like, these are all these different styles that I am aware of that I want to play in. And then he went and made albums that were more similar in sound than Continuum. Continuum is kind of this breaking out of here's who I can be, like, and I'm really proud of all this stuff. And at the end of the
Mhm,
day, like all the heartbreak songs, it comes to its kind of culmination with these two finale pieces, which is In Repair and I'll Find Another You. Like it's In Repair has this beautiful like mantric like lyric just being repeated over and over again at the end of the song. Oops, that's not it. Right.
I'm not together, but I'm getting there. I'm everywhere. I'm not together, but I'm getting there.
It's to me, it's exactly how I feel. Like I said, I've had my heart broken like way more times than I would have liked in the last 5 years. I mean, I wear my heart on my sleeve. It's easy to break it. But that said, I love a song like this because it's kind of that final step in the grief process of like, I'm not all together, but I'm getting there. I'm in repair. And then I love how the last song, it's just tonally, even the way that it sounds musically. I'll find another you. It's really like almost playful, and it's this ending note of like, I'll find something again. Like my world has not ended, you know?
Yeah,
So to me, it's just, it's a perfect album. He has things to say about the world around him, and he has things to say about the world within him. And I think they all offer something up, and he does it in a very unique musical style that is very much his own, that he will continue to then unpack over the next almost 20 years.
for sure. Awesome. Well, I think that that's a great summation of it. I think it's a perfect note to end on.
Oh, perfect note
Before we
to end
go,
on. Nice pun.
yeah. Before we go, where if people enjoyed listening to you talk about this, where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, well, I won't be talking. Man, I would love to find more opportunities to do stuff like this, Mike. This was super fun. So thanks for letting me come on and talk about this.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it. I mean, I do, like I said, a Star Wars podcast, The Wampa's Lair, which you can find us here in ThunderQuack. Very, very simple to find. And then I promise to be finishing off, I promise within the year, the Bat and Cat podcast I started with my friend Amy about a year ago, where we're kind of talking through the Matt Reeves 2022, the Batman film, 20 minutes at a time. So we will be finishing that soon. It's almost completely out, but we're going to finish
Yeah.
it. Hopefully bring some new life to that as well.
Awesome. That basically does it for this episode. Just a real quick note for everybody. In February, we're going to be doing a ThunderQuack network wide sort of, it's kind of a pledge drive to get people to head over to Patreon. And I'm just going to really quickly let you guys know here that there will be bonus content for every podcast that we've got running on the network right now. Like every active podcast will have some bonus content that will be Patreon exclusive. You'll only be able to get it on Patreon. And you know what? I'm just gonna pull the trigger on it. I've been going back and forth about whether or not I'm gonna do this, but I'm just gonna make the decision. I'll put it out right here, and so everybody's gonna find out. We've been doing Perfect 10 for almost 2 years, about a year and a half now. And people ask me a lot of the time when I'm going to talk about the most obvious Perfect 10 of all for me. And that's obviously it's Star Wars. And so Perfect 10, Star Wars, A New Hope will be the Patreon exclusive episode. You'll only be able to get it if you're a Patreon supporter. So you'll have to head over to patreon.com/thunderquack and pledge your support over there in order to get access to that episode. And that'll be out in February. That'll be out sometime in February. I don't know who I'm going to do that episode with. That's the hardest part for me, is like, who's the one person that I can single out of all of my friends to talk about Star Wars: A New Hope. It is a near impossible task. So I have to figure that out. But that is what I'm going to do for that episode. We'll have another episode of Perfect 10 next month. I got a couple of people sort of waiting in the wings, and I don't have anybody nailed down yet, but I don't know. I might check in with Ty and see if she's ready to finish our Heath Ledger trilogy. I cap that one off, but we'll be back in about 4 weeks with another episode of that. In the meantime, you can check out all of the other podcasts on ThunderQuack. Joe and I are doing regular episodes of Forced Perspectives now every 4 weeks. Along with, we've brought back, I think well, I guess we would have technically brought it back, but Danielle and I had recorded so far in advance that it hadn't officially come back yet. So now officially the ThunderQuack podcast is back, and that's also Joe and I. Every 4 weeks we sit down and just talk about geeky stuff. We needed a place to talk about Ghostbusters, but we didn't want to start a Ghostbusters podcast just for the new movie coming out. So it was like, well, let's bring this back, and it gives us a great place to talk about that, as well as all of the other stupid geeky stuff we love to talk about. So look forward to that in the future. Also, Joe and I want to do Perfect 10 Pokemon Red and Blue in the future, but I don't know when that one will happen. But I'm just going to tease that one right now. So yeah, so that's kind of everything on ThunderQuack right now. And as Karl mentioned, the Wampa's Lair has just joined us on the ThunderQuack podcast network. And we're so happy to have you with us now, Karl, you and Jason, with the Wampa's Lair. I keep saying this because it's like, because you've been doing the Bat and the Cat. Jason had done Talking Time Lords with us back, like that was almost like when we launched ThunderQuack.
Yeah.
So you guys have both been on the network, but Wampa's Lair wasn't part of the network, which is your guys' sort of bread and butter. It's your regular podcast. So to have you guys now part of the network with that podcast, it just makes me happy. I'm just happy that you guys are all in and on board. So everybody go listen to Wampa's Lair. Go listen to Karl and Jason talk about Star Wars. It's pretty good, you guys. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good podcast.
It's all right. It's all right. We definitely have fun, and that's the most important thing.
Awesome. Cool. Well, that's it. Thanks for listening to ThunderQuack Perfect 10. Thank you, Karl, for joining me. If you found joy in today's discussion, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast service and leave a rating and review. If you want to chat about today's episode, you can head over to our Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. We've got such an awesome community over on the Discord, so join us over there for sure. But until next time, remember, it's not about the score, it's about the love. Stay geeky, everyone. ThunderQuack Perfect 10 is hosted by me, Michael Cohn. Follow us on Twitter at ThunderQuackPod, on Instagram at ThunderQuackPodcast, on Facebook at ThunderQuack, and join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. Support the podcast by heading to patreon.com/ThunderQuack to get early access, bonus episodes, and the ThunderQuack Perfect 10 pop quiz. ThunderQuack Perfect 10 is part of the ThunderQuack Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.